Not too loud, a little louder than I wanted actually. Welcome back everybody, I'm Nick, and today I'm just going to be doing a short update video on my 1988 Chevy Caprice LS SWAP project. Alright, so I have been preparing this thing for Power Tour West. I have about 600 miles on this LS SWAP. It's a 5.3 liter out of a 2005 Tahoe. It has a 4L80E out of like a 2006 2500 series Chevy van. I'm not sure if it came out of a Chevy or a GMC. Turned out pretty clean. A few things not perfect. Air conditioning works. The heat works. Runs pretty good. Doesn't quite make enough vacuum for the AC vents and everything to work perfectly, but it's okay. Actually runs really good. Starts right up. Runs like a factory car. I'm gonna go over some details of it real quick. Like I said, it's a 5.3. It has a stage 2 BTR no springs required cam. It has a Howie aluminum racing radiator. Basically, it's the biggest aftermarket radiator that would physically fit between the frame rails that I could find. And that's so that I could use with very little trimming the Ford Raptor, 2010 Ford Raptor fans. I figured if it would cool that, it would definitely cool anything I do to this. I'm running a knockoff ICT billet eBay bracket for the AC, an LS1 water pump and hoses, the truck accessory stuff for the alternator and the power steering. I've got a Hydro Boost conversion. This thing has 14-inch Brembo brakes. The Brembos are off of a Cadillac XTS. The rotors are off of a C606. And overall, this thing is an awesome cruiser. Theoretically, with this cam and everything, I should be making something like 270 or more at the wheel. I've seen a lot of Silverados, stock Silverados with the tune, making 300 with this cam on, well, the high lift version of this cam in an otherwise stock truck. So I'm really hoping to be making 270 plus. My exhaust is probably not completely ideal. It's true dual 2.5 inches with chambered mufflers and resonators. So I feel like the exhaust isn't too bad. Could be a little better. Truck intake flows great. So hopefully I'm at least 270 at the wheel. This thing does scoot pretty good. From a dig, it's not fantastic, but once you're moving, it actually scoots really nicely. So in preparation from this trip, I got the car running, obviously. This is a very fresh swap. You can see a little bit more information on it in some of my older videos, but I've really only had this thing running for just over a month, and that was with a different transmission that I initially had it running. The transmission that I had was a reman transmission. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. It burned itself up in less than 100 miles, maybe 75 or 80 miles. So I ended up with a Facebook Marketplace 4L80E. Put that in the car, did a little bit of fabrication to make it fit where the previous transmission, which was a 4L60E, was. The deeper first gear in the 4L60E definitely made this thing get up and move a little bit better. It's a heavy car, but the 4L80 otherwise is fantastic. In the last week, I've charged the air conditioner. I've added this coolant overflow bottle, which is probably just barely too small for in the winter time, but it's what I'm running. The AC works now. In the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've got 600 miles on this thing. Really wanted to have at least 500 miles on this thing before I took it on the trip, so that I could find any problems. And I did have a couple of problems. Obviously, I had that issue with the transmission. You'd think a reman transmission would just be good to go. Depending on the supplier, it might be from my supplier. Unfortunately, it was not. But the other major issue that I had that needed addressing was my oil pressure. After 300 miles, 250, 300 miles, something like that, I had dropped to only like 11 or 12 PSI at a 700 RPM idle. To me, that was insufficient. So I put 15W40 in it to see what that did. It only raised it up a little bit to something like 15, 16 at idle. And it was just barely 10 psi per 1,000 RPM. And I was not comfortable with that. I'm confident the issue is that I changed the cam and did not change the cam bearings. That's a pretty common LS thing. If you don't change the cam bearings, you kind of end up 50% of the time you end up with low oil pressure. In my case, it was lower than I considered acceptable, so I went ahead and put in a high volume pump. I went with the stock replacement for a displacement on demand engine, and I know a lot of you think that that's super overkill. I'm sure that it's super overkill. I have fantastic oil pressure now. I read some horror stories, people claiming it could run the pan dry on like a drag strip pass, but nobody actually said it had happened, just that they believed it could happen. No one said that it had happened to their car. I could not find a single instance, and I looked. So I decided to go ahead and do it anyway. Just do it once and make sure that I had plenty of oil pressure. That's a band-aid to the problem, so what I'll probably do is run this engine hopefully for 2 or 3 years and eventually build either another 5.3 or maybe a 6-liter, something with square port heads, in preparation for an eventual probably large single turbo build. I'd really like to do a Pro Charger on this, but that's too much money and way too far down the road. Single turbo might be doable in a couple of years. Eventually, I intend to put Dakota digital gauges in this car, but that's not in the cards right now in terms of money, and they're on back order. They're back ordered anyway. You can't get them for like 6 weeks out. So I decided not to splurge on that right at the moment. It wasn't going to come in time for Power Tour. I'll get those eventually. In the meantime, I'm not planning to spend any money that I don't have to spend on an odometer and speedometer. It'd be nice, but it's not really worth it at the moment. Eventually I'll get that. I have about 600 miles on this setup right now, maybe a touch more, and I am super happy with it. There's one small issue that this car does have that I'm going to take it with anyway, and that is related to the transmission. Putting the transmission in and seeing if it would work was a gamble. I bought it as the guy I bought it from told me he didn't know if it worked or not. His story was he bought it with an engine. He wanted the engine for a Chevelle project he had. He didn't want the transmission. He's going with a T56. So I got the transmission cheap, which is fantastic. But he didn't know if it was any good. The engine he bought had a spun bearing. Unknown transmission of unknown mileage. He knew it was high mileage, but I don't know how much mileage was on this transmission. It had a little LKQ tag on it, which tells me that at some point, whatever vehicle it was in got a junkyard transmission or a used transmission through LKQ. So that's kind of interesting. Or his story wasn't right. I don't know what the truth is. But I took a gamble. I pulled the pan off. The fluid was an okay color. I threw it in the car. And it has actually been really nice. The only negative thing about it is the 2 to 3 shift is soft. No matter what I set the line pressure to in the Holly, the 2 to 3 shift is very soft, and it is late. I've been driving it anyway. I've probably got, of that 600 plus miles I have on the car, probably all but 80 of them are on this transmission, and it's never not shifted. There's a delay shifting into third. I can see that the Holly has shifted into third, but sometimes it's a long time, like 3+ seconds that it takes to get into third. Seems to be a little faster at light throttle than when you're on it, which is weird. I don't know if it's related to line pressure or the load or what the actual issue is. I just put half a bottle of Transmedic by Gunk in it, so we'll see if that does anything. A lot of people with 4L80s on the internet said that helped their problem. Some of those problems were similar to the one I'm having. Some of them weren't. Most of them were not identical. Does seem to be a problem that people had, but kind of interesting. Anyway, I'm planning to take this car as it sits. Planning to drag race it. Planning to autocross it. Another thing I did in preparation for this build is I had some QA1 upper control arms. For the rear I put on it, it already had some lower control arms, max speeding something control arms, cheap. But the QA1 upper control arms have a Delrin bushing at the frame side with, they call it like a roto joint or something. It's like a spherical Delrin line bushing, and at the axle side it's polyurethane. The lowers are polyurethane at both ends, so the rear end is tightened up a lot. When I did this build, the front got all Delrin bushings, Delrin Global West bushings in the lower control arms, and some CPP knockoffs for the upper control arms. And I put Moog ball joints and all of that. Front end is fantastic. I've got some Moog lowering springs, 750 pounds per inch of compression, very stiff. I've got some 9C1 or Impala SS front and rear sway bars. Car is much better than it came from the factory. I wouldn't quite call it on rails. The body mounts still need to be done. But I would say it's very modern in how it feels. I think if you got out of a 10-year-old truck and got in this, you would feel that you'd feel this probably handles better than the truck, but the drive quality is probably pretty similar, 10, 15-year-old truck to this. All right, this thing has been sitting for a couple hours, so I'm gonna start it real quick. I'll let you hear it. Pretty much starts like a new car. Idle's great. You can see the AC's on. Not too loud, a little louder than I wanted actually. Sounds like an LS, but it definitely sounds like a truck. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed watching this. I know I'm uploading midweek, which is kind of weird, but I wanted to give you an update before Power Tour. There is some weirdness going on where it's possible that Parker's car won't make it to Power Tour. Parker's had some stuff going on, and it's not my business to divulge, but there's been a couple hiccups with his car, and he's got a couple other things going on, and it's possible that Power Tour is not in the cards for him right now. It's also possible he'll end up riding with me. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that you'll watch more. Give me a like and subscribe, and I'm going to be uploading Power Tour content all weekend and probably for a couple weeks after that as I get through all the video that I'm going to be editing about it.